Hello and welcome to Social Anxiety Solutions, your journey to social confidence. I am here with Mr. Steve Wells, and Steve is a psychologist, a tapping practitioner, someone who is trained to the highest level in provocative therapy. He's the co-developer of SET, PET, and he has been training counselors and therapists for the past 2 decades. And since 5 or 6 years, he developed intention tapping. Did I say all that right?
Yeah, man.
Well done.
Well, I
Welcome.
think the intention tapping is more than that now. I keep thinking it's only about 5 years, but it's like 7 or 8. Time's just speeding up. It's just going
Got
so
it.
fast. Yeah.
Maybe
So
I've been doing
anyway,
6 years. That's possible.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Steve, what I wanted to know from you, I think will be interesting for the listeners. Like, how did you get into the helping profession even before you found tapping? And we're kind of talking to like an audience that is fairly new to tapping. So, how did
Okay.
you go into that? Was that pain motivated, or was that just sounded interesting to become a psychologist, or?
Definitely a lot of the things where I've made significant advances in my life have been pain motivated, but uh, and yeah, I was interested in this stuff at school. I was reading I was reading everything, but I was also interested in self-development stuff. But the thing that kind of put me on this path was a complete failure when they have these mock exams that you do before the end of the year of your last year of high school, where if you pass that, then you go on to glory, and if you fail, you join the dole queue to get supported by the government. And I comprehensively failed the mock exam so severely that I even surprised myself. But it shouldn't have surprised me, because I wasn't doing any study. I was spending my time going out with my friends and drinking and smoking and just wasting my life pretty much, but having a lot of fun. And that's kind of antithetical to getting results with things where you're supposed to study and
I
so
know.
on. Anyway, I failed so badly that it was like, and a teacher, not one of my teachers, when I told him my score, he just shook his head and said, "Oh, you'll never recover from that." And that helped me, because my mind thinks in opposites. Like, you tell me I can't do something, I think, why
Right.
not?
Yeah, right.
So that's probably why I took to provocative therapy so much. And so I wanted to prove him wrong, but part of me believed that it was a little bit, it was late in the day, and I had like a few weeks to learn 2 years of stuff that I had largely ignored. And I found a book called Think and Grow Rich, which really helped me at that time in my life. Now I don't agree with everything in Think and Grow Rich, but I really needed it at that time, and it just changed my life. And I basically pulled my finger out and set my intention to get a score which should not have been possible for me. And that was my kind of first experience with setting a real goal to do something which was, at the time, seemed to be beyond me. And I was so astounded by the fact that this worked, and that it's like there is relatively a formula for success that you can apply. So I started getting interested in helping other people to do that. And one of these, I started reading voraciously on those pop psychology books, essentially.
Mm.
And then one of these guys was like a career counselor. I thought, well, that'd be a good thing to do. And I'd like to work in high school. So they have a position over here, which is like a school psychologist, who also in high schools helps kids with their careers. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So set my intention to do that. And, that's what I did. And I did that for a number of years. And, then I got invited to do various things and went up the promotional scale. And then I got the boss from hell, and and ended up setting my intention to move out of that. And I've been working for myself ever since about 1996. Before that, I was setting up my business part-time. I tried a couple of different business ventures. And then in late 1997, a guy who was mentoring me on helping me to build my business come back from the US, and he brought these videotapes of Gary Craig doing this strange tapping thing. And I watched, and I could see the results were there for him, but I thought, can I do it? That's the great thing about tapping, is that, yeah, you can, and you can reliably get results. So, and then I tried it with my wife.
For people who don't know what that is, sorry to interrupt you, but what is tapping in a nutshell?
Tapping is a process of stimulating acupressure points on the body by tapping on them with your own fingers. And if you told me even a month before this that I would be doing this the rest of my life, since then, I would have said, are you crazy? That's wacko. That's weird. That's stupid. It's not scientific, etc. But I was convinced by the results. Number one, I could see the results that Gary Craig was getting. Number two, I tried it out on myself and I could feel the results. I tried it with my wife, who was very skeptical, and she just got a result immediately. And then she got over her needle fear. And
so she had a needle fear and she applied this tapping, and then she didn't have a needle fear anymore?
That's right. She had to have a blood test the next day. And we only did like one round because she wouldn't let me do it again after that. She's like, that's really stupid. But then she went and had the blood test, and she said, well, I didn't feel any fear, and I was even able to watch, and it was just like astounding to her. So, I started studying these things and trying them out with clients. Actually, what happened was I had a client who was coming to me, and she had a severe trauma. Her son, who was being a real pain, was threatening to kill her, like 17-year-old kid. And she came in one day, she's shaking like a leaf, white as a ghost. And I'm like, what happened? She said, the other night he cut a cake and he wiped the blade off on her arm in a disgusted manner and threatened to kill her with it. And so she's just like, as far as she was concerned, she was dead. Anyway, so I said, well, and I was working with her and the kid. So I sent the kid out. I was working from home at the time. I thought, I hope he doesn't destroy my house while I'm working with his mum. But then I did the tapping with her, and I just like, I was still just basic level learning it. And I said, well, look, I've been learning about this thing, we can do some other things if it doesn't work. Would you like to give it a try? And she said, yeah. And there was a moment where we were focusing on that incident. And she tapped on this point on the side of the index finger, and it was like, I saw the problem leave the room, like it left her body. And she says, boy, that one worked, didn't it? And I said, yeah, it looked like it did. I said, how do you feel about what happened the other night? And she's like searching for it, she's like looking all over the place and trying to get her problem back, which I've now seen thousands of times since. And she says, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to bother me as much. I said, doesn't seem to bother you as much? You were shaking, you were white as a ghost. And she's like, yeah, it just doesn't seem to upset me right now. And I said, well, does something upset you? She said, yeah, the thought of him coming back in here, that upsets me. I said, right, let's focus on that. And we're doing the tapping and focusing on that as the problem. And she drove home. She told me the next week, she said she couldn't get the smile off her face. And in the week, when she came back, she had stood up to him. She had said to him, you're not going to do this to me again. And we have to learn to work together. And I'm your mother, and you have to start treating me with respect. And if we're going to live together, we have to respect each other. And he started pulling his finger out, and he got himself a job and became a fine, upstanding member of the community. As far as I know, he still is. And that was just like, when I saw her tap on that point, it was just like, that's still.
Steve, let me just check. You are a psychologist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now just checking
No,
because
no.
it's
I
an
trained
amazing
in
story.
psychology.
Yeah.
I trained in psychology, but I have fully recovered, right? So
Right.
I I'd seen people make shifts and people said, oh, that feels better. This is great. But that was just so dramatic. And if you just notice results, I'm
Yeah.
more interested in results than I am in dogma, theory necessarily, ritual, uh, just because something's been around for a long time and it sounds really good doesn't mean it can do everything. Like, let's say CBT, for example, cognitive behavior therapy. I was
Mm.
like really into that because I was so much into my head at the time, and it made a lot of sense to me, and it was so logical.
Yeah.
The only problem was it just didn't fix everything. But that was just because I was being too irrational and I needed to change my thoughts and think more rationally and so on. And I was like the reincarnation of Albert Ellis, who created rational emotive therapy, and I could argue you into getting better, basically,
Yeah.
because that's what a lot of CBT, that type of CBT was a lot of, rational thinking.
Mm.
Well, okay, since learning tapping, I realized that there's more to it than that. And it's, the thoughts are involved, but now I believe it's emotional attachments to thoughts that cause problems, which is, part of intention tapping, as you know. And the tapping does something with where the problem is experienced, which is in the body. Yeah, we can get caught up in our negative thoughts, but unless there's some feeling with that, what's the problem? There is no problem unless it upsets us in some way. It makes us feel bad in some way. And nothing is really a problem except for how it makes you feel. And so, tapping is a body technique. It works in the body. It has a lot of effects psychologically in other levels, and your thinking clears up as your body reaction clears up. I'd say if you have a stuck feeling, you have a stuck perspective. If you have now it also is similar. Like if you have a stuck perspective, that usually translates to a stuck feeling somewhere. There's something going on in your body. But the stuff that I learned in cognitive therapy in the early days was more mind focused rather than awareness of what's happening in the body.
Right. So if we take an example for someone with social anxiety, say that they have an upcoming meeting that they feel anxious about, what would be a CBT approach and what would be a tapping approach?
Well, the
Roughly.
CBT approach might look at what are your thoughts about that, and you're catastrophizing and you're awfulizing and you're, shooting on yourself and all that stuff. And that's actually helpful to know that. And for some people, that's really enlightening. But it doesn't always change how you feel about that. And it might be, instead of thinking that you have to perform like a champion, you ratchet down your expectations to, more logical, rational ones, and so on. And maybe you change your self-talk and stuff like that, and you challenge your irrational beliefs that are extreme, and you adopt more rational ones, and so on. That can be helpful. And if you're very, very mind focused in terms of your problem, it can make sense to you, and it can help you to have something to hold on to and relax, and it can be beneficial for a lot of people. There's not lots of research on it for no reason. It does get results, okay? It's just that, in the research that's now been done on tapping compared to CBT, tapping gets the same or better results more quickly, okay? And when we did our research on food cravings, where we had people doing cognitive therapy versus doing tapping, and then we looked at what happened for them, a lot of the people who had done the CBT said, yeah, I still have the cravings, but I've got a way to deal with them. Whereas the people who did the tapping said, I don't have the cravings anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just to interlude briefly, that's also when I started overcoming my social anxiety, I was hopeful that, and tried all the changing your thoughts and like affirmations, visualizations, all the self-help you could imagine, challenging my thoughts, you name it. And yeah, all of that gave me some confidence when I was at home. But then when I was in the actual situation, I would still get triggered. And
Well,
the
because it's
tapping
so
allowed,
overwhelming. It's so
right,
overwhelming.
right.
That's the thing. So
You
if
can't
you,
out logic those emotions. Yeah,
no,
especially not when you're in the moment. And so the tapping helped me to actually neutralize those emotions to where I'm in a social situation and I used to feel super anxious. And now it's like, there's nothing. And I just feel calm and I feel at ease. That's the huge thing. Like you can actually get rid of it. That was
that's right.
is
So
amazing. Yeah.
now let's branch out a little bit, because there's cognitive therapy and then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, right? And
Mhm.
so there are some behavioral techniques that are included in that that can be helpful. So relaxation training and all that kind of stuff is part of that process. So it's not just the mind stuff. There also are some body components to
Right.
CBT. I just think that if, in terms of the body components, they can be really helpful. But again, the results from tapping are superior often in a lot of the comparisons that have been done.
And from my limited understanding, CBT is kind of like, okay, well, you have these feelings, but just ignore your feelings and instead just change your thoughts and change your behavior, and then eventually your feelings will change. And tapping is like, well, let's look at the feelings that are there and let's just address the feelings, and then your behavior will naturally change. Because if you don't feel shit scared to actually go to a meeting, then you're much more compelled to actually go there. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, to be fair, there's a lot of different variations of CBT, and some are more along the lines that you talk about. So to be
Mm.
fair, not everyone's saying ignore your feelings and so on. And there's been a lot more of those kind of, in recent years, a lot more awareness about body approaches and somatic approaches, and some of those are getting combined with cognitive approach.
Okay,
But
great. That's good.
I think, but on the whole, you're right. Tapping works on whatever it is that you're aware of that's causing the problem, whether it's attachment to really strong thoughts that they wouldn't be strong if they didn't have strong feeling attached to them, right? So it's releasing that attachment and dealing with the effects in the body, which you may or may not be aware of. That's the issue. If you really are overcome by feelings, strong feelings, then you can start with that and you can work with that. And tapping helps to restore harmony in the mind-body system. Okay.
Right.
So, yeah, and some of that can be, the starting point is not being scared to have feelings in your body. It's a paradox, because anxiety is something you just don't want to feel, man. You just want to get rid of that feeling.
Right.
Well, the more you try and resist it, the more it damn well comes. And it's a bugger. That's a technical psychological term, a bugger. In Australia, it just means a really annoying thing. It doesn't have all those negative meanings in other countries. Just have to explain that, because over here we say that like, darn, damn, that's annoying, that's frustrating. Well, it just is. That's what anxiety is. It's the more you resist it, the more you have of it.
And lots of people will become really scared of it. This is one of the top fears. The main fear is like, I'm afraid to be judged negatively, but then the fear of becoming anxious is very much tied into that. Oh, I'm scared I'm going to get anxious. And then when I'm anxious, people are going to see it. That's going to make me cringe, and now they're going to judge me. And so I'm really scared to feel these feelings. And that then becomes something that they carry with them in a social situation. Oh, I better not get anxious. Oh no, I'm getting anxious. And now this the heart racing or the lump in the throat or the slightest sign of a social anxiety symptom is labeled by the brain as a threat and triggers a stronger fight, flight, freeze response. And that's huge. And yes, there's logic around that, and you can reframe that and help people understand it and challenge the thoughts. But there's a huge difference between that and actually no longer being afraid of anxiety. of having that feeling in your body. That takes away the threat. And then when anxiety comes up, you know, it's a different story. You're like, oh, okay, I can handle this. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's paradoxically the starting point is actually being able to allow the difficult feelings. And so sometimes you're using the tapping just to allow you to bear with the feelings which seemed before overwhelming. Okay. And so it's a paradox that when you allow this to come, it can move through you. But when you try and push it away, it keeps trying to move and it can't move. It's kind of coming up against that resistance. And so it's trying harder to be able to move through you. And then when you can move, allow it to move and move through you, then you can move forward and do whatever you need to do.
Yeah. I remember way back when, before I found the tapping and other approaches, I was scared of feeling bad, because when I would feel bad, I would feel so bad for so long and I couldn't get out of it. So I bet for quite a bunch of people that hear this, they're like, oh, well, I don't want to purposely get into feeling bad, because then I'm
right, because your experience of that is just, it gets worse. Unless you have a way to, or confidence that what you're doing is going to move that through and that you're going to get to the other side of it, then why would you want to do it? Of course. Okay. So the great thing about the tapping is that when you do it, if you are aware of feelings in your body, you can feel it immediately. Like I can feel that right now. So there's obviously a little bit of tension I was, only marginally aware of. Start tapping and I can feel that straight away. Okay. It calms things down in the body. So the more you do that, the more you can have confidence that this process can actually help to mitigate against those activated, stress-related, the cortisol, the threat reaction that comes in your body, where you're interpreting the situation as a threat, as if you're going to die.
Right. Right. Meeting new people, being the center of attention, someone attractive entering the room, all of these kinds of situations are labeled by your brain as a threat. And you feel as if, there's like a wild bear somewhere around. It's the same kind of response that you're having. Yeah. And the tapping
and the reason why that is usually because you've had experiences in the past where you've suffered, and your brain goes, I'm not going to let this happen to you again. I'm going to notice anything that's around here. And anytime there's anything like that that might be coming or that is around, I'll alert you by reminding you of how bad this felt so you can run, get away from it, And then the other thing, your mind can project things in the future. And so it can go, hey, this is somewhere that you might suffer. And by the way, remember how that felt? That felt like this, Now your past is actually projected into the future, and then you're suffering the past pain over and over and over again ahead of time when you're not even there, because your mind is making stuff up about how you're going to fail and how you're going to suffer. And here's some ways that you might suffer again, It's a projection machine, all right.
Okay. So obviously this is a very structured interview, as per usual.
It's all good.
Yeah. All right. So we've kind of covered how you got into things. You started out as a regular psychologist, then you found out about the tapping, and then what is intention tapping in a nutshell?
Okay, so intention tapping is something I discovered in a time of pain when I was suffering physically, and also, when you get down physically, you also often get down emotionally as well. So I was just really upset about myself because I wasn't moving forward, and I was physically unable to move forward because of this heel spur that had been created by me trying to run big distances, and obviously running dysfunctionally, and brought on this problem. So I knew tapping. I'd used tapping for years on lots of stuff, and it worked brilliantly on so many things for me. And then when I learned to tap regularly, what? Sorry?
Like what? Like what did it work on for
Oh,
you?
lots of things where I had to confront issues, where I had to deal with people challenging me. In fact, even in the early days, I started using tapping, and then I had people challenging me about using tapping because it was an unproven technique and so on. So it just enabled me to be able to focus on what I needed to focus on and move forward instead of just getting triggered into, they're going to run me out of town, and all this kind of stuff. So that's just one example. But lots and lots of times I would, if I had to perform at a high level, because I was getting into professional speaking, doing bigger presentations, and so I would get anxiety about the performance and stuff. So it was really good for that. But some things I would still just, still get it. And then I started doing tapping regularly, and it just brought daily basis, just brought my overall stress level down, and that made a big difference too. But I still had lots of challenges and issues that I wasn't really getting over. One of them has been my lifelong aversion to work due to having a workaholic father. So I've been, to get myself to do work has been a real lifelong self-development process. Anyway, there had to be a reason why I went into psychology in the first place, and that's probably some of it. Anyway, I at this time, I had all these frustrations. I was doing tapping on it. I was doing a whole range of techniques, and I just made a discovery about using intention. I literally had this thing jump out at me from Byron Katie's book, which was a statement that was, it's not the thought, it's the attachment to the thought that causes suffering. And I'm like, yeah, it's the emotional attachment. If we didn't have emotion attached to that thought, it's just the thought. And when you do tapping on a negative thought or a negative belief, before it upset you, now you have the same thought. It doesn't upset you at all. So it's not the thought that's the issue. But in this moment, I just had an insight about what if we could just use intention instead of using regular tapping. So I formed the simple intention. I release all my emotional attachments to this problem. And I literally had this just big shift at that time, the thing that you see with people with tapping, the yawning and the sighing and the shift in, body. And it was like, wow, like it was like really palpable. And it was immediate. And I'm like, okay, let's try that again. So then I focused on another part of the problem, and I said, I release all my emotional attachments to this. And it's like, same thing, just big shift instantly. And then I'm like, I must be talking myself into this. This can't be real. But then I did it again, and it worked again, and I did it again, and it worked again. And then after doing it several times, I became aware of what's happening in my body, and I realized there was a disturbance in my chest. And I'm like, yeah, I know from my training and working with tapping that with tapping, there's always something happening in the body. And in tapping, we see that as a disturbance in energy flow, and the tapping can sometimes cause that to come back into flow.
Right. You might think about, an upcoming gathering, and you have like a tension in your chest or a lump in your throat or an upset stomach. Right.
Exactly. And, and the best everyone else can say is, oh, you have the butterflies. Oh, well, you just have to get the butterflies to fly in formation. What the hell is that? How the hell does that happen? That never worked for me.
Right.
Anyway, or you're supposed to relabel your fear as excitement. Really?
Yeah.
Nah, it's not the same thing. I can tell a difference.
It feels very different. Yeah, right.
Anyway, I might have fear and excitement, but they're not the same feeling. I can tell you that. Anyway, so and then again, I'm like, okay, I've got this tightness in my chest. I could do tapping on that. What if I just use intention to restore the energy flow? So I formed a simple intention. I restore the right energy flow to my chest. Instantly, it just expanded out naturally, and I just took a nice big deep breath. And literally, I'm now thinking about the problem. It's like, it ain't so bad. The whole thing is different. I'm thinking differently about it, and all that rational stuff comes flooding in. I don't have to make myself think it. I now feel that way. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, I believe that. It's not so bad. It really isn't. And so on.
Let me relate.
That, I was attached to my doom and gloom thinking.
Let me relate it to an example of people with social anxiety. So when using intention tapping with someone, say, who's really upset because they were in a social situation and they made a fool out of themselves and they think their reputation is ruined. We might say, okay, I release all my emotional attachments to my reputation or what happened or whatever. In the beginning, they're really upset about it. But then after saying that statement, the emotion dissolves, neutralizes, their energy restores, and then they naturally have insights like, actually, it wasn't that big of a deal. I doubt that they even noticed it.
Exactly.
They have some rational thing that you're normally trying to like force feed into them. And these insights come naturally when you
That's
don't
right.
have the emotion. Yeah.
Exactly. When you're open to it because your energy is flowing rather than resisting, right? And I would say it seems like the emotion dissolves, but actually what I would say happens is that the emotion moves through the body rather than being stuck. Okay.
Yeah.
So, now this is just part of the theory about what's going on, but it sure seems like it. And I observe these shifts happening with people all the time, moves around the body, the feelings move around, and then suddenly, it's clear and it's like, okay, I can breathe now. And, they don't have to force themselves to breathe. They don't have to do deep breathing exercises. They're just able to breathe. And
Yeah.
so,
And it's so fast. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fast on each aspect of the problem. So just like, you and I know, and even for me at that time, each time I was just, an aspect of my problem was releasing. I was releasing emotional attachments to that aspect. And the example that you gave, even that, there could be 3 or 4 different aspects just in that one scenario. There's like, oh, my reputation is damaged. And then there's like the projection in my mind about how people will shun me in future and so on. And then, there's also what's happening in the body. So these are all different aspects that may need to be addressed. Each time it just clears, it clears.
Yeah, good point. So when you told the story earlier, and then I tapped here, and boom, I saw her problem leave the room. That's why I ask you, you're a psychologist, right? Because people are like, yeah, right. And problems, issues have typically a lot of aspects. So yes, the tapping is powerful. Yes, intention tapping is more powerful than the tapping in my experience. And yet these issues have a lot of smaller parts to them. So if you have social anxiety disorder, okay, there's your feelings about it. There's your limiting beliefs. There's your history that caused that. There's your resistance to letting go of it. And I could go on for a while. And all of these
sometimes they're not all equal. And sometimes, some of them have an effect and they're all kind of connected together and so on. But sometimes, like, for example, with that lady, it was such a big shift that was like a big aspect for her, because that was the worst event that they'd had. He'd been getting worse and worse and worse, but literally to have that experience of the knife and him threatening to kill her, she thought she was dead. And then once she could just get free from that, it's like, I'm not dead yet, I'm alive. Yeah. I can still take control of this. I can do something about this.
And so sometimes you have a really big shift, and other times it's just tiny shifts. I think it's important to point that out as well. As people are like, oh, I didn't feel this amazing. What are some kind of shifts? How do people know that something is changing? What is a small shift?
Sometimes it depends how aware you are, because some people are not that aware of what's going on in their body because they're scared of having feelings in their body. So you know, I could see things shifting in their body, but they may not be aware of it because they're focused on the next thought or whatever. So the first step is to learn to pay attention, to become more self-aware. Like, you know, when you think that thought, what's going on in your body, for example? Just pay attention to that. And then when you do this, what happened in the body with that? Or when you're, even if you're only aware of the thought, okay, there's an image. Let's just pay attention to that image and notice what happens, because sometimes the image shifts, like it gets further away, and so therefore it's not as threatening, or it changes color or something like that. And so the thoughts shift, or that thought gets replaced by another thought. Well, all right, let's go back and check that thought and see if that thought stirs you up now as much as it did a minute ago. And it usually doesn't, you know.
Yeah.
And usually the reason why we think nothing's changing is because we feel just as bad, because we've got another triggering thought come straight after that one. And it's like, well, I'm still feeling bad. Yeah, but now you're focusing on this. Before you were focusing on that. Okay. So yeah, the starting point is awareness. The starting point is getting, you know, more comfortable in noticing what's happening in the body, because it's guiding you a lot more than you think. Okay. We've become so attached to our thoughts that we're not aware that we actually have a body some of the time, especially guys like us, right? You know, if you have a feeling, you think it's something you ate, you know. But the whole world is trying to get rid of bad feelings and trying to medicate bad feelings and do anything not to feel. Well, I found that you learn to feel your feelings, man, that can become really helpful. Really helpful. And now, after using tapping for years, I'm way more in touch with my feelings than I was before.
Same, but in a very positive way, right?
Exactly.
Like, my sensitivity used to be my enemy. Like, oh no, I don't want to feel that strongly because I'm going to get super anxious, or I'm going to blush at the drop of the hat at the wrong moment. Like, I'm too sensitive. But now it's like, I don't get triggered by those strong negative emotions anymore, because I've managed to process these. I've allowed them to complete their cycle or whatever it is. And as a result, I am in touch with my emotions, and I can sense, this person around me isn't feeling that well. Let me alter my approach. You know, you can be very attuned to what's going on in your environment, and your social skills actually become a lot better. You're not numb. You have a healthy, regulated mental and emotional well-being. Yeah.
And you're not jumping to attachments associated with that, like, oh, I'm having this feeling, it's going to overtake me. Oh, I'm having this feeling, they're going to see me blush. All the judgments about it, the you know, the projections about it, and all that stuff that the mind comes up with. Yeah.
Right. And I want to take this to the practical level, what we were talking about in terms of aspects. So if you have a upcoming gathering that you're invited for from work and you can't avoid it and you have to go, and it's 2 days before and you're thinking about that, you might be really scared. Then you might use one of these statements like, I release all my emotional attachments to this upcoming meeting. And that might drop your anxiety from a 9 to a 7. And then,
or might actually, surprisingly, it might increase it, and you become aware of what it is about the meeting that you're scared of, which is, and then you can use it on that. So you say, you know, you become aware of, like, oh, they'll judge me, or oh, I won't know what to say, or, you know, I'll get into a situation and my mouth will clam up, or whatever it is, you know. And then you can release your emotional attachments to that projection. And when you do that, each aspect that you release is a little bit more freedom.
And so when you have that upcoming scenario, you might have 7, 17, or 27 aspects, small parts, thoughts, feelings, fantasies, imaginations, that all together make up that perception of threat of that upcoming meeting. And as you aim statement after statement, or you tap on all of these different aspects, the emotional intensity connected to it starts to neutralize, starts to neutralize, starts to neutralize, and you become calmer and calmer as you think about it. And eventually you can think about that upcoming event and you're like, I actually feel calm about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. And ultimately, underlying that, you may also have some beliefs that you've developed about yourself from all your past failures that you need to get into and treat long term, so that all of these situations become less stressful or less threatening.
Right. Right. So then you have the intention statements. And is that different from the tapping, or?
Okay, so first of all, the intention tapping combines these sort of intentions with tapping. So, there are other people who have various approaches and they don't do the tapping anymore. I love the tapping. I find the tapping allows things to harmonize in the body. It facilitates the flow of the process much more easily. And so the combination of the two is superior to just alone. When I discovered this, I discovered you use the intention, you can have the shift, right? But then I also found that when you combine the tapping with this process, you've got the best of both worlds. The tapping is working on stuff that you may not even be aware of, okay? And so, just like before, when we were talking and I started tapping, I went, oh, I can feel myself calming down. I wasn't necessarily consciously aware of that body tension. So the tapping, we did continual tapping, and that simple process of keeping the tapping happening keeps harmonizing and tuning and toning the body energy. Then it also facilitates the shift, so that when you do, I release my emotional attachments to this, or I restore the right energy flow, just keep doing the tapping. And if you keep doing it and wait and just allow it to do its thing, it will happen. And something will happen. Sometimes that can take a minute or two. If you just keep tapping, and then, sometimes I use a statement, I'm like, well, I didn't feel anything, but let's just wait and see what happens. And then after about a minute of this, I go, oh, and then the next part of the problem comes to me, So yeah, the intention tapping, technically speaking, it combines simple energy techniques, which is the simple tapping approach I developed with David Lake. That's a simplification of EFT, which is the most well-known tapping approach that we learned from Gary Craig. And it combines that with these types of intentions, and the types of intentions I call that intention-based energy process, because using intention to influence the body energy flow. Okay, so, and on the whole, a lot of it revolves around the two simple statements that we've talked about here. I release all my emotional attachments to this problem. I restore the right energy flow to this area in the body, or to this feeling, or even to this emotion. And you can get a long way just with that. That's simple self-help version of it. Yeah.
Great. And that self-help version you teach on your website, I presume?
Yeah, there's a lot of free videos on our website and articles on the blog and so on at intentiontapping.com. There's also stuff at EFTdownunder.com, because we started with EFT and then we branched out from that. And there's a lot of resources on there about tapping and the evolution of tapping generally. And I've done lots and lots of free webinars, so people can go online and they can see my webinars. There's links to that on the website. Also, my YouTube is Wells Down Under. So Wells Down Under, all one word. And we also do trainings, and I train practitioners in this, and we're certifying practitioners in this, and we've got them all over the world, and you're one of them. So yeah, good.
Number 10 in the world. Yeah, I'm in the top 10. So.
Well, we don't rank them in that order. You're the 10th.
That's the 10th one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's bring the conversation back to how to apply this, or rather a question that people might have. And that question is like, well, I tried the tapping, and I couldn't get any results.
Hmm.
Why might that be?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd be very surprised if they didn't get any result at all. Sometimes when you're really overwhelmed, I understand. It's like, if you're totally hooked and you're underwater, then you might, might find that doing it yourself for self-help is just not enough. In that case, I might recommend working with somebody else to get there. And then they can show you how to apply it in ways to make it work for you. But also people say it's not working when they mean, they felt better there, but then they still got triggered over here. Well, and that's
Exactly.
because of the reason what you said before, that there's other aspects, there's other triggers, there's lots and lots of, your anxiety probably has thousands of triggers. And that's the problem with anxiety. It attaches itself to so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start out with a simple enough problem, and then it starts attaching itself. Well, yeah, it could happen over here, and it could happen over here, and it could happen over there, and this could happen, and that could happen, and there's so many different things that could happen. So, so anxiety is insidious, and it just shuts down your life basically, and
Yeah.
it really takes away your enjoyment of that. So, number one, it might be that you're doing it only when you're overwhelmed, so you're not doing it and noticing the shifts. Number two, you might need help to work on this. Number three, you might have different aspects that you need to work through. Number four, maybe you just didn't keep it up on a regular basis to get enough of it in your system, because what we find is that over time, if people do this every day, their stress and anxiety comes down, and their confidence and life energy comes up. And then, like I discovered years ago, if I hadn't been doing it for a while, my anxiety was back just like it was before, and just as bad as it was before. And it's like, damn, now I know it's like a emotional fitness. If I'm not looking after myself, then things are gonna turn to crap. So basically, it's like, if I'm not looking after myself physically, if I'm, eating badly for too long, and if I'm not doing my tapping enough, then, and that can happen if you've got like a higher level of anxiety, or a more enduring type of anxiety, like a general anxiety problem, which I had. Then you just need to have enough tapping over time on a regular basis to keep yourself at a low enough level, so that you're not easily getting triggered to high levels of anxiety. In terms of the numbers, if let's say you're like most people, you're probably running on 3 or 4 anxiety before you do anything. Okay, so you already got a little bit of anxiety in the system, and then something happens and it triggers you. So now you go from a 3 to an 8. But if you bring that set point of your anxiety down by doing tapping on a regular basis, then it sits around a 0 to 1. Now you get triggered. Well, now you're at a 5. It's still anxious, but it's manageable. And now you can see what the triggers are. And now you can focus on those triggers. You can release more of them, and you're just giving yourself more freedom. So,
yeah. And like you said, social anxiety as well, it links it to so many situations, people, circumstances. And before you know it, you feel anxious, just like, walking out of your door and like, oh, there's the neighbor, or, people are watching me, and you can have it like everywhere. And when that is your experience, you can apply it to where, okay, now it doesn't bother me anymore when I see my neighbor. Okay, it doesn't bother me anymore when I stand at the bus stop. It still bothers me when I'm at work, but no longer there. And you might have, say, 30 scenarios in which anxiety gets triggered. And if you work through 2 of them, then you only have 28. It still sucks, but sucks a lot less, because now you have some situations in which you don't have it. That also gives you then the confidence to and the motivation to keep going, because you're like, hey, I want to also not feel anxiety in those situations, and then you'll keep going. For some people that takes a fair bit of time. For other people, that happens more quickly. And like you said, yeah, if you get triggered and it's a 5, that's bad, but it's a lot less bad than when it's an 8. And if you keep working at that 5 gets even lower. to the point
Yeah.
where you don't get triggered. Yeah.
And
And
also what happens is that you go, okay, so it's not always exactly as clearly as you spelled out, because you can also have situations where you do the tapping, you go out, you go into this social situation, you're brilliant, you're like the way you want to be, you know, and then the next time you go into the same kind of situation, you're a disaster. You know, you're like, oh my God, because of course the mind's like, well, I did that once, I should be able to do it exactly the same again. Okay. Well, even the best in the world don't perform every single time they go out into situations. But of course, we have the expectation that that has to happen. All right, well, if we delved into your psyche, we could probably find that some things were different about those different times and so on. But ultimately, what the mind says is, ignore that success. It's all loserdom. You know, you're still a loser and you're never going to make it. Whereas what we really need to do is go, okay, we had that experience. Now we know we can have that again, right? We've opened up the door to possibility. And so sometimes I also do the tapping on helping people to hold on to their successes, because their mind will discard successes immediately. You know, you could go out and have 100 really good days, and then you go out and have one bad day, and your mind will say, and you'll say, it's just as bad as it ever was. I'm never going to get over this, you know?
right. Yeah. I in our social confidence club, one of the things that I talk about is like setbacks into breakthroughs, because this is an experience that people have. They're doing so well, right? They start to do, they're couple of months in perhaps, and they're like, I feel comfortable, you know, I haven't gotten anxious in the longest time, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have a setback. No, I got anxious. And that anxiety, it can happen that you get triggered strongly. That's not always the case, but it can happen that you get triggered strongly. And when you get triggered strongly, it can feel as if you're back to square one. It's not true, because of all the other
Exactly.
work you've been doing. It's not true. You've just
Well, because you're
uncovered
thinking from
gold.
within the anxious state that you've got
Right,
triggered into. So now your
right,
thoughts are just as small as they were back when you did have the problem. Okay.
exactly,
And your mind will completely discard 100 days in a row of doing really well.
exactly. We
But
laugh.
also,
It's like, yeah, yeah.
the other side of this is, if you did this, if you got completely over all of your anxiety, right? I guarantee you that what you'll do is that you will create a challenge for yourself that's going to bring up anxiety for you to further develop you. And I know this in my own life. Like I got to the point where I could present in front of audiences, any size audience, no problem, right? And then we organized an event where we brought together our revered teachers, and we were presenting on stage with them. And I found myself feeling anxiety that I hadn't experienced for 20 years.
right,
And it was like, well, this is a different aspect. This is a new level. This is the next level. So,
exactly.
you know, I got triggered into like, oh my God, this is, and the mind could have said, well, you're a loser. You haven't come anywhere. You haven't, but I have, because now I'm doing it on something different.
Yep.
And, you know, I had the occasion, fortunately, to help my wife with this, because she's an artist, and she started getting really good at her art, and she has to do artist talks, which is her worst nightmare, right? And she don't want to be the center of attention. She wants the art to be the center of attention. We did lots of tapping on that. And then when she started to get better, she could give the talk. And she said, I still felt anxious, but I could see what was triggering it. And then we did the tapping on those things. And now those things don't trigger her at all. Then she got invited to present at a conference. And she's like, oh my goodness, talk about, you know, trial by fire. And so we just went through, we literally deliberately thought about all the things that could go wrong, because that's what her mind was going to fixate on. And we released emotional attachments to all of them. And when she got up there, a couple of those things, you know, like one of them was the equipment might not work. You know, she'd never talk with a microphone and stuff like that. And some stuff did go wrong, nothing to do with her, because the people who were organizing it hadn't done their tests and checks and didn't bother her. She found herself actually enjoying presenting at a conference, which she never could have even imagined she would have, you know? And she was also doing the finger tapping. So one of the things we teach people to do is, of course, with tapping, you're tapping on body points and so on. That's not something you can do in public real easily, but you can do this tapping on the finger points using the thumb of the same hand to do the tapping. And that's subtle, it's discreet. You can do it with your hands under the table, or, with your arms folded, with your hands behind your back. And you can be out in a situation that stresses you, and the tapping is bringing down some of the anxiety at the time.
Yeah. Yep. When we were talking about the quote unquote setback, I just wanted to finish that thought. You can then do the inner work to figure out what it is that got triggered, then process that, usually, some past event that's gotten active. You can process that, deal with this whole thing, and now you've actually made yourself more resilient, and you're more at ease, and there are even less things that trigger you, and you have even more freedom. So that's how you can take that setback and turn it into a breakthrough. And as you do all of this process that we've just been talking about, you can get to a place where indeed there's no anxiety in social situations anymore, which I experienced. I've been free of social anxiety for a decade, maybe longer. And then indeed, like Steve said, okay, well, then there are new challenges that you can start. Like, I started podcasting maybe 8 years ago. Well, I didn't have any social anxiety there, but I started podcasting. Now I was going to do something completely new. I was going to be interviewing the people that I had learned from. And in my first 1, 2, 3, 4 episodes, I felt anxiety. So before the podcast, I'm tapping on all the thoughts that I'm having come up. I'm tapping on all my worries and concerns and fantasies. And then, I was mildly anxious at the start of the podcast, and during the podcast, I'm doing the finger tapping. After the podcast, I'm asking myself, okay, what was I nervous about? What was I anxious about? I'm doing the tapping. Next podcast, I'm doing the same process. 3, 4 episodes later, I'm comfortable on the podcast. Salsa dancing. I started salsa dancing 5 years ago. I was completely relaxed and at ease in social situations anywhere. And yet I start salsa dancing, and I had 10 lessons, and I go to the dance floor. Well, guess what? Looking like a dumbass, with everyone looking amazing around you, girls giving you a pity dance and all of that, that brought up a whole bunch of other things. So before going to that dance, I did a bit of tapping. After the dance, I tapped on everything that came up. And I did that, and I continued like that. And within 2 or 3 weeks, I was comfortable dancing socially on a social dance, even though I still looked like a complete idiot, because salsa dancing is difficult, and they talk about the salsa hell. It takes you about 6 months to get a decent level where girls actually want to dance with you. But I was comfortable, even though I looked like a dumbass. And that's just amazing. That's what these things can do, and that's how it liberates you.
That's the difference between, because see, what you're talking about is taking steps forward, which is like exposure, right? And in psychology, exposure therapy is a big thing. Make yourself do the thing. It'll bring up the fear, but the more you do it, the less fear you'll have. Yeah, but you know what? If you do nothing else, then you might have less fear, but you still have some fear. Whereas when you can combine exposure, getting yourself out there and doing the thing that brings up the anxiety with tapping, and you start to notice what the triggers are and release your attachments, restore the energy flow, then you're able to move through with much more fluidity, and you're able to move to the point of low anxiety much more quickly.
Yeah, and I would say also about the force yourself to face your fears approach. For a lot of people, that's too scary to do, so they don't do it. And for a lot of people that do it, they need to keep doing it, because I did it a bit, not a lot, because it was so damn scary. But I did a bit of it. But I would get confidence after having faced my fears, but then that confidence would leak out, and it was just way too draining to do that on a continuous basis. It's crazy.
And some people, they don't get the reduction in anxiety, so they can do it 400 times and still feel just as terrorized as the first time. So
Right.
on its own, it's not always enough or helpful for everybody. But for most people, the more they move forward, the less they feel anxious by the thing, because some of the fear to start off with is just fear of the unknown. And you get that out of the way, and then you learn. So like you did that with your podcast, you start to learn a bit more, you get better at it, you practice it, and you're no longer, the ranked beginner that you were before. So you develop confidence based on, and competence based on the previous experiences and improving on them and so on. But yeah, tapping allows you, number one, to take those steps, and number two, to make them smoother. Yeah.
And they talk about, well, you need to face your fears in order to gather evidence that you can handle that situation and that situation is safe for you. Yeah, try that when you're feeling very afraid and anxious. That's very difficult to get a positive social experience. But when you do the tapping and you're actually comfortable, then it's so much easier to gather that positive social experience. And, everything is just easier and more comfortable, and it just goes quicker.
If you have a judging mind as well, your mind will constantly be saying that you're not doing any good anyway, and even afterwards. But when you do the tapping on that and you release that, then you can start saying, well, yeah, I didn't do it all bad. I did that bad, and that wasn't so good. And here's what I can do better. So yeah, it just helps you to see things more clearly as well. Of course, we're preaching to the choir here, because we're both beneficiaries of the tapping ourselves.
Right. Well, it's just a genuine excitement. Like like the amount of things that I tried for 5 or 6 years, with blood, sweat, and tears, and very, very little results to show for. And when I had my first experience with an actual shift in my body, that changed my life. Not then and there in the moment, but just I finally had something that I could use in order to chip away at my social anxiety. That was just so incredibly empowering. To have something that you can do to get rid of these excessive feelings is just amazing.
Exactly. And it gives you the confidence of knowing that you can have that in that situation. If you are triggered, you can actually have some control in this scenario, rather than just going out of control, which is the fear with anxiety. Exactly. I tell people there's only a few things I've learned in all my study of psychology. And like I said, I've been doing this just about my whole life. There's only a few things that I've learned that work at home, and tapping is one of them. I use it, my wife uses it, we've used it with all of our kids. And, I've shared it with my friends and with my colleagues and with my clients and with my, in-laws, outlaws, you name it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, in that little excitement, let's end it here. So thank you for your time. Again, where can people find out more about intention tapping and any other places you want to send them to?
Thanks, mate. Always a joy. intentiontapping.com. And well, that's the number one place to find out more about intention tapping. So just go there, intentiontapping.com. And we've got lots of free stuff on there. And also, if you want to get involved in, come along to one of our programs, you can come, anyone can come to a level 1 workshop, even though some of the people who are doing that are going to learn to become practitioners. It's primarily to learn it for yourself. And anyone who wants to be a practitioner, I reckon you've got to learn to use it for yourself first anyway. So we make that a priority. Yeah.
Awesome. Steve, thank you very much for your time. It was great.
Yeah.